Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin
and pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you, Dr. Virginia?
I'm doing good. How are you, Dr. Val?
Good. I'm doing well. We have actually been in the process of finding a new church home. It has been an interesting search. It's always a struggle for me because for so much of my life, I mean, for basically
you were on staff.
30 years, I was on staff.
Yeah.
And so our church family was where I served. And even when I was serving with our state convention, I still, it was still just very different because I had this ministry that I was doing. And we had a church home that we were able to serve as members because I was on staff with the convention, but it was still just very different because I was still just in this very active ministry role. Mm-hmm. And so now this has really been the first time that we have really searched for a church home where it has been completely looking at the church as serving as a member and really trying to find the place where we, feel like it's family and feel like, because we're, for me, because of my background, I look at doctrine and I look at church function and I look at how the church is, run and all of those things that probably the normal church member doesn't really look at, but I'm always kind of looking for those things. But it's been a really interesting process for the last few years for me, looking at ministry in a different way outside of serving on a staff, but looking at how I can connect to a ministry. And so I think that our discussion today sort of ties into that in the fact that I think that we are always, all through our lives, looking at the gifts that God has given us and the calling that has been placed on our lives. Whether it is to serve as a volunteer, whether it is to serve on staff, whether it is, to do all of these variety of things that we have opportunities to do in ministry, but finding the way that we can best use our gifts to serve God.
Yeah, and especially as a leader or a teacher in a ministry, you really want to understand your giftings, your strengths, your weaknesses, understanding ourselves, and then being able to serve in our giftings and in our strengths can make such a huge difference with our experience in ministry, with our effectiveness. And so there are a lot of ways and tools out there that are great for helping us understand ourselves, our strengths, our giftings, our weaknesses, all of that, and then serve more effectively within that.
I've taken all of the tests. Have you taken all of the tests?
We were just talking about that. Yes.
I have done, let's see, I have done the DISC. I have done Myers-Briggs.
Yep.
We've done they have the Enneagram test now. They have, what are
Enneagram one that I haven't done yet. I haven't gotten into that. I was too far into Myers-Briggs a few years ago to where I'm like, I've got my thing. So
there's I think I have done all of them over the years because I am a little bit I enjoy self-reflection. I enjoy learning more about myself. I want to know more about why I do the things that I do, like how my personality fits into all of these things. And so knowing all of these kinds of things, I love taking those tests and I love trying to the spiritual gifts, inventories. Yes. I love doing those. I enjoy all of that. So yes, if you have never done Myers-Briggs or spiritual gift inventory, they're a lot of fun. And I think they give you the opportunity to really reflect on, areas where you have strengths and areas where you have weaknesses. And it really gives you an opportunity to look at yourself a little bit more. And I always ended up administration teacher. Always. always the same.
Yes. Yes, and I think these sorts of frameworks, there is no one end all be all framework
No,
that's
there's
the
not.
perfect framework for understanding yourself completely, because people
No.
are way more complicated than that, and
Yes.
no one fits perfectly into any box,
No.
but they can be useful for understanding ourselves better.
Yes.
And the flip side of that coin as well that we want to be aware of is that we don't pigeonhole ourselves
No.
into a corner and say, well, this is just the way that I am. Well, understanding yourself better is not an excuse for not growing
Yes.
in our areas of weakness.
Right.
It's not an excuse to not continue our spiritual growth, emotional, mental. And
I think that so many people do use that as an excuse.
Yes,
They will
yes,
say,
yes.
well, I have a dominant personality, so that's why I come across as being rude, or,
No, you could just learn to be polite.
you can work on those things.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that's important for us to remember when we're working with kids. That they do have the ability to control some things, and they do have the ability to change some things, even if they have a tendency to be one certain way. And just like the kids, we are too. I've said,
Right.
I've taken those tests over all the years. If I had one today to take, I probably would take it again just for the fun of it, because I enjoy it. But there are things that I have learned over the years about myself that has changed, and things in areas that I've grown, and in areas that I've worked on. And so we really can't take those assessments and look at them and say, well, this is the reason why I don't do this. I can't do this. We can't use that as an excuse. I think that we are called to grow and to mature and to learn more. I don't think we ever stop learning, not just about ourselves, but learning more ways that we can communicate and build relationships, because relationships are what we were created for. But I think that it's just really important for us to remember that those things can help us to be able to make sure that we are serving in the area that is where God wants us to be.
And serving in our strengths and through our God-given personalities, because God made you the person that you are and gave you your natural attributes and your natural tendencies for a reason. And so it can be, at times we can feel in ministry that we're supposed to be a different way, that people expect children's ministers to be like this, or people have this expectation that everybody in ministry is like that. And so just learning that God created you exactly as you are, to use you where he put you. He knows your personality. He put you where he placed you for a purpose.
He knows,
and he wants you,
your capabilities. He knows. Yes.
And he wants you to serve as you in your ministry.
I was thinking, I can remember I was in a meeting one time where a group of children's ministers that have been serving for a very long time. I was young at the time and newer in ministry. And I was with this group of children's ministers that had been serving for many, many years. And somebody made the statement about a younger children's minister that had not had any training, that had not had any kind of experience, that had not, she didn't have, a degree in children's ministry. She didn't have any of those kinds of things. And one of the ladies made a statement of, she really has no business being in children's ministry. And here I was, again, very young, and also just thought for a minute about what to do, and opened my mouth, as I often do, that maybe I shouldn't do, but that time I did, and said that I feel like that it is great hubris for us to think that just because you have a certain personality or certain experience or a certain degree, that means that you are qualified to do something that God has called you to do. You are in the position that you are in for such a time as this. God has called you into children's ministry, whether you're expecting it or planning it or not. You have been given for this time, this responsibility. And so God wants you to use the experience and the gifts and the talent that he has given you in this position, no matter what anybody else might think about whether or not you deserve to be there or you should be there. You are there because God placed you there.
Amen.
And so I think it's really important for us to be aware of our abilities,
Yes.
but to also remember that we are trusting God to serve through us. So
Amen.
it doesn't mean we have to have any certain credential for God to be able to receive the glory for what we can do in our ministry.
Amen. Amen. That'll preach. And it's like, because so if we think about two different continuums, one being introversion, extroversion, which is one that's very much in the sort of cultural milieu right now. People think about it and talk about it, and most people kind of have a notion of where they land on that. I am definitely more introverted. If you think about another continuum of being people-oriented or task-oriented, I definitely fall on the task-oriented side of things. And so I am a great organizer and great planner. But whenever you think of a person in the ministry, you don't think of an introverted, task-oriented person. Oftentimes, the kind of stereotype, I don't know if that's the best word to use, but oftentimes the kind of expectation is someone who's, extroverted and, a wonderful people person and just a wonderful, shepherd and that sort of thing. And so, for me personally, just sort of coming to the understanding that like, I need to be aware and even recruit volunteers in areas that aren't my natural strength.
Right.
At the same time, God made me this way, and He gave me the calling that He gave me and placed me in the positions that He placed me for His purposes. And so it's not my job to question that or try to change into this whole different person.
Right.
I am to serve God within my strengths and be aware of my weaknesses and recruit volunteers in those areas and still try to grow in those areas as well. But we don't do ourselves justice, and we won't be as nearly effective in the ministry if we feel like we have to transform into this wholly different person and personality.
Right. Well, and that's just it. To be in children's ministry, you are looking at a wide variety of gifts and expectations that must be met. It is not a typical job, like, for example, if you're good with math and you become an accountant, where, you are going to be sitting all day and you're going to be working with math and you're going to be able to do your thing. Children's ministry requires a large number of skills.
Yes.
You do have to be, in some ways, at some times, an extrovert that can stand in front of a group of 100 kids and teach a lesson or to lead a group. You have to have that ability, but you also have to have the ability to be able to plan and schedule and look at safety and security.
Organize 100 volunteers.
Right. And so there are so many different requirements in children's ministry. It is virtually impossible for any one person to be able to do all the things.
Right.
But honestly, I've met a lot of children's ministers that are trying to do all the things. And what ends up happening is one of two things. Either one, that person gets burned out many years before they need to be.
Right.
Or two, the ministry is just not well run. And things start to fall apart pretty quickly because again, it's like you said, you have to be aware of your strengths and your weaknesses, and you have to be aware of those times when you can stand in front of a crowd or you can sit and do the planning. You have to be familiar with that, but you also can't expect to be able to change into someone that you're really not. It's going to come through in the work that you do. And so I think that we have to be very aware of the things that we are good at and the things that we struggle with, and embrace that and be fine with it. Because no matter what, there might be an expectation from someone saying you have to be everything. It is not realistic to think that you can be everything.
Amen. Amen. And even kind of going to this idea of recruiting volunteers and getting help in areas that aren't your strength. And so, like for me, like I said, I'm introverted, I'm task oriented. And so recruiting key leaders or door greeters or desk workers, people who are more of those extroverted social butterflies, just wonderful, warm, outgoing people, surrounding myself with those kind of people.
Right.
That way, as a whole, our ministry is this warm, welcoming place. And I have other people coming alongside me and just lending their natural gifting and their natural, just how God made them, to creating that environment that doesn't come as naturally to me.
Right.
And then the flip side of that, maybe you are that warm, welcoming, outgoing person, but you need to recruit people who are very administrative, who know how to do spreadsheets and can do the spreadsheets and help you with the organizing and help clean up your supply closet and help organize the volunteer schedule. And so God makes all kinds of people to fill all kinds of roles. And it's just being realistic about where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then identifying those people who your area of weakness is their area of strength, and then strategically placing them into these leadership roles alongside you. We have great episodes about recruiting key leaders. So there's, we have more about that as well. But today, we're talking about and thinking about, knowing and understanding ourselves.
Right. And I think that's important, because part of serving your ministry well is making sure that you are providing for all of the needs of the ministry. And I know I was working with a children's minister a few years ago, was consulting on some things for the building. And he was just one of those types of ministers that was very outgoing and loved spending time with the kids and loved being on stage and loved acting silly and loved doing all of those kinds of things. And he was very good at connecting with the kids and teaching those Bible lessons to, really help them understand. But he was not strong in administration. He didn't have things calendared correctly. He hadn't been planning for the future. He had really not been doing all of those little things. He wasn't providing the supplies that were needed, and teachers were getting frustrated, and things were happening in the ministry that was really frustrating. And he had the opportunity to hire an assistant children's minister. And he chose to hire someone exactly like himself, just a young man who is very outgoing and very good with the kids and but again, had really no experience in administration. And so one of the things I think is really important is that even though you might naturally draw to people who are very much like yourself and have that same personality, and you want to pour into them and you want to help them, it's really important that we think about the needs of the ministry. He had this opportunity to hire somebody to come alongside of him. And personally, I think that for him, finding somebody that had those administrative skills that could really help him with the planning and the supplies and training teachers and doing those kind of things would have been much more helpful for his ministry, because here now they're both struggling and not knowing what to do. And so I think that even though, I'm sure that there was a reason behind the thought process of the hire, I think that it's just really important that we kind of sit back and have that opportunity to think, how can I find somebody that I could partner with that has strengths where my weaknesses lie, so that we can provide a well-rounded ministry for our families and for our children.
And we tend to lean toward things that we're comfortable with, things that feel familiar. And so, of course, it would be tempting to hire someone who's exactly like us. And no one wants to set up a situation where it's like, man, this person and I, we're always going to view things differently. But that's a strength. I mean, it can be, it takes some intentional work, as you're working with people who view things differently. But oftentimes, as you're working together, the ideas that come out of that are so much better than you could have thought of on your own, because of the differing perspectives.
So I think it's important for us to know these things and be all right with that. Not trying to be that super person that can do all things and that doesn't need any help and doesn't need anything, because we do.
That's not realistic.
You can't do children's ministry on an island. You can't do it by yourself. It's just not possible. You have to have a community of people that are serving in a variety of ways. And so it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of the resources, let's talk through and think through some of the resources. So we kind of mentioned stuff like DISC, DISC,
Right.
Myers-Briggs. That one's kind of old, but it kind of comes in and out of fashion.
I started to say some of these are just solid, like I can
Yeah.
remember the very first time I ever took the DISC, the DISC, was actually in a summer job that I had. I mentioned before that I did customer service during the summer when I was in college. And basically they required all of the employees to take the DISC when you came in, like on your first day.
Fun.
And then literally I'm dating myself big time. In the handbook that we had that had everybody's names and phone numbers so that you could,
did it have your letters?
Actually had a paper, the book that had all of the information, and it had your letter beside your name.
How
and
funny.
the idea behind it was because the people who ran the company really believed that to communicate, it helped for you to know what type of personality, because you might not work with a person because it was a large company. So you might not ever see a person, but you needed to call them to ask them a question about something that was happening. And this way you would have just a little bit of insight to know how to approach that person and how to talk to them. And so, so that was the first time I took the DISC. And so it's that
so
interesting ways that we can take these tools, that some of them might be considered older, but to be able to take these tools and to really get some insight into how you communicate, how you look at the world, how you interact with other people.
Yeah. So Myers-Briggs, DISC, Enneagram's one of the new ones that I'm not very familiar with. One that I found recently from listening to the Carey Nieuwhof leadership podcast, which we've talked about before and which we love, is this. And I've been listening to, the book is called Working Genius by Pat Lencioni, he's written tons of books on leadership. And so this is his newest one, and he's got a Working Genius podcast that I've been listening to that's like super interesting. And so it's about understanding yourself and the ways, essentially like your sort of natural ways that you work well, your Working Genius, and like then also your the ways that you naturally do not work well that are more of a challenge. And so that one's been a really interesting one to listen to. And another book that I've read fairly recently that I thought was great was Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards. And so it was a very interesting book for me because we're both, sort of nerds who love all this stuff. But I thought it was very practical in that whatever your personality is, if you are more of a people person, you're more extroverted, you're more warm, or whether you are more of an introvert or more like, very direct. Either way, she teaches you subtle body language and subtle cues to help you sort of balance out your natural cues. Because one of the things she talks about in the book is that if you are one of these, warm, friendly, outgoing, golden retriever sort of people, that sometimes they aren't taken very seriously. Sometimes they're trying to communicate a very serious message and it's not always received, with the weight that they want it to be received. Or if you're, these sort of introverted, very factual, ABC kind of people, which is what I am. Sometimes you can come across as cold or unfriendly, which I definitely don't want to do. And so trying to be intentional about sort of incorporating just subtle body language to, for me, sort of warm up and become and come across as warm and approachable and friendly, because I'm never going to be the social butterfly that lights up a room. That's just not who God made me to be. But I always want to be warm, approachable, friendly, kind. I always want that to be the perception of who I am. Even knowing that I'll never be the social butterfly and being okay with that. So,
well, and that's the whole point, is that God created each one of us individually in a special way. And so we need to embrace the things about ourselves that we know that God has given us, because there's no right or wrong to it. It's not right to be an introvert and wrong to be an extrovert, or the other way around. It's who we are, and it's how we function, and it's how we were created. And we need to accept that and embrace it and not be, because that's one of the things is that so many times, especially when people start talking about like the Enneagram and some of these others that have become so popular in recent years, there's some people that will look at things, and I've seen them ask people and say, well, it's a bad thing to be this number, or it's a bad thing to be this, or, and that's the whole point. None of these tests are designed to say you are bad or you are good.
Right.
It's our own perception that we take and think, oh, if somebody is an introvert, then that's a bad thing. Or if somebody is a leader, that's a bad thing. Or if you are type A personality, that's a bad thing. It's not. Right. I think any of the personality types, I think any of our giftings, I think any of them can be a negative if we use them incorrectly or we lean too heavily into them.
Right.
I think the idea though is to know yourself well enough, you know, for me, it's, you know, you've talked about sort of your testing results and how, you know, things come out and how your personality is. And for me, I have always wanted to be an extrovert and have worked my whole life to be one because I thought that was what I was supposed to be as a leader. And I have found that I'm a mix and there's a name for it and I can't think of it right now.
The ambivert.
Yeah, I think that's it. I was trying to remember because it took me a lot of years to finally go, you know what? I can be an extrovert, but I really need those times where it's just me. I need to be able to recharge. I am not constantly an extrovert and I don't constantly need to be around people. But I do need to have those times where I'm on my own and can decompress and kind of, you know, calm myself down and rest a little bit because I'll get overloaded. And it wasn't until I realized that was okay.
Yeah.
You know, it took a lot of years for me to go, oh, wait, it's okay that sometimes I need to have this time by myself or that I need to do this. That's not something that's bad. That's just part of who I am and how I'm built and what I need to be able to do. Right. And so I think that it's healthy for us to be able to embrace the things that God has given us, but also to try to learn from them and find ways where we can still, you know, have relationships with people and meet people where they are and still be okay. And so if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so we kind of touched on this as well earlier, but like spiritual gifts tests, like those can be very useful as well. Again, we can't use them to pigeonhole ourselves. You're like, well, I can't stack chairs because stacking chairs isn't my spiritual gift. No. But we did talk about a little bit about this before we started recording. I mentioned that I took a spiritual gifts test as like a teenager. And what came back for me was teaching and administration. And I had no framework for the administration part of that. I mean, obviously I knew what a teacher was. Right. But I was like, I don't know, okay, whatever. But, you know, it's funny because God has unfolded that so many times, you know, over the years and utilized that. So it makes a lot more sense now looking back. But things like that can be very useful as well. And you're saying that we're kind of in that same spot too. So
yes, right. Well, that's why I said I tested when I was young, I always tested administration and teaching. And if I took it today, I would be administration and teaching. It's been different seasons as to which one came up as a 1 and which one came up as a 2. But typically those were the giftings that God gave me. And I really tried to, and I'm telling you, if you have a gifting, you know, when I went into college as an undergraduate, when I was, you know, 18 years old and I was going into college, I started out as pre-law. And then
me too.
I didn't know that either. Because, you know, I had thought younger, I'd always wanted to teach. Teaching was what I wanted to do. And my parents were very blunt in that they were like, you'll never make any money as a teacher. So no, you know, you need to go into something else. And so literally that first year of college, I was pre-law and realized I couldn't. I hated it so much. And then I was business administration, business administration.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried communications and I tried, every test I took said the same thing, that I was an educator, and I ignored every one of them. And I tried everything because, and finally just had to sit my parents down and say, look, I appreciate it, but I think that this is what God has called me to be. I'm supposed to go into education. Teaching is what I'm supposed to do. And so my second year of college, I went into the education program and didn't look back. And so it is that sense of like, sometimes we have these things that we want to try to force ourselves to do because we think it's what we should do. But I really think that when God gives us a gift, when he puts something in our heart, when he places us in certain places, that we just know that is who we are and what we're supposed to do.
Right.
And so that's when we need to finally just, embrace it and accept it and move forward with it. And, and then you get to the wonderful adventure of seeing how God takes each step and leads you to exactly where he wants you to be at exactly the time that he wants you to be there.
Yeah. Amen.
No matter what anybody else expects from you, but to be able to really embrace what he's called you to do. And so I think being familiar with our gifting, being familiar with the gifts that God has given us, the talents that he's given us, to be able to do that. Because again, it's like you said, if you are a kid and you are supposed to be a teacher, it is really hard. You have all of these kids that like, they're really good at playing the piano, or they're really good at playing basketball, and they find their gifts really early. Yeah. And then there's me who, teaching and administration is it. And as a third grader,
it's not as exciting as being an astronaut.
Not as exciting as a lot of things. And it's also not as noticeable. Like it was like, I'm really lousy at everything I try to do because I'm not, and so you can have that frustrating, but like I said, sometimes it just takes time for certain giftings to show and for those opportunities to be placed before you. And so I think that it's just, it's exciting to see, but it is very stressful when you're making those decisions.
Right.
And I think once we are able to recognize our own giftings and we're able to recognize our strengths and our weaknesses, it helps us to be able to see strengths and weaknesses in others. And it really becomes very useful information when we are placing volunteers into positions with our ministries.
Right. And it's very difficult. And so part of the reason why what we were talking about and why we wanted to do this episode, it's very difficult to make accurate self-assessments. We tend to either, be very aspirational and think of ourselves how we want to be, but maybe we aren't actually that way, or we tend to be very hard on ourselves and overly negative. And so it's difficult to view ourselves accurately. And so whenever it's that way for everybody, just in the whole world.
Right.
So whenever we go to a person and say, man, I have watched you do XYZ really well.
Right.
I think this is an area of strength. This is an area of gifting that I see in your life. Right. Sometimes people can be like shocked.
Oh, yeah. Oh, many times I've had people look at me and go, I could never do that. No. And yeah.
And you're like, no, but you did A, B, and C, and you did it super well. Like, that's why I'm coming to you. I've seen this in you. I've identified this in you. And that's why I'm coming to you, asking you to, fulfill this particular role, fulfill this particular need that we have in the ministry. And so, people oftentimes just aren't good at self-assessment, aren't good at identifying their own strengths and weaknesses. And so, just like what you're saying, the better we understand ourselves, the better we understand these key characteristics and these key traits, the better we can also help other people see things in themselves they may not readily identify and help them get into areas of service that are also in line with their areas of strength.
Right. I think that is one of the biggest problems that we have in children's ministry is that so often when we need someone, we go up in front of the church, we ask the pastor to from the pulpit to just say, we need volunteers for children's choir.
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to have people that hear that, but they're never going to assume, oh, that's something that I could do, or that's something that I would enjoy. They just aren't. There's just, it very rarely ever clicks that way. But if you can go to the adult choir and talk to some adult choir members that love choir and that love singing, and go to them specifically and say, you know what, you are such a strong choir member and you love music. It's obvious. And I can see it in your face and in the way you do things. Have you ever thought about serving in children's ministry, leading the children's choir or helping with the children's choir? And so that changes the way that you are helping a volunteer find themselves, because you find somebody that already has this gifting. Obviously, music is already this gift, but then you have to help them, because I had a church where I was working with the ministry, and they had just done that. They had gone to the choir. They had found this woman who loved choir. She loved children. She really was very excited about being the new choir leader for the children's ministry. But then the children's minister asked her to lead a 20-minute Bible study devotional before choir started, because they did a 2-hour kind of thing, and they wanted to do, like the first half to be devotions. And she just panicked. Because Bible study was not something she considered to be her strength. And she was very nervous in front of the kids trying to teach a Bible lesson. Plus it was on top of everything she was trying to prepare and choir, her own things. Yeah. And so we actually, found somebody that could teach that Bible study for her at the beginning. And she was so excited and so grateful, and was just, and because it was just this load that was taken off of her. Because for the children's minister to lead a 20-minute Bible study where you're given the material seemed like it was no big deal.
You're like, oh, this is nothing. Yeah.
But for her, it was a deal breaker. Like, she was ready to, even though she loved the choir aspect, she was ready to walk away. And so it's finding somebody that's gifting is there, but also making sure that you're not asking them to do more than their gifting. When you bring them in, that would be when you would pair them with somebody else, or,
And we talk about this more in our episodes about recruiting volunteers. But, whenever I talk to people, I always ask them, where have you served in the past? What have you enjoyed doing? What are your favorite things to do? So like right now we're in big VBS recruitment mode, trying to get those last few people. So it's like, have you served in VBS before? What have you done? What have you loved doing? Because sometimes they'll be like, well, I did recreation, but I really didn't enjoy it. But there was one year when I did music and I loved that. And so, just trying to have those conversations, with people as you're recruiting them, to try to get a really good feel for their interests and for their passions. And so just because they've done something for years doesn't mean that it is their strength and what they love. Sometimes they have done recreation for years because there was a need and they felt like they should fill the need, and it's not their passion or whatever. And so just trying to be aware of that and help people identify that as well in their areas of strength and gifting.
And I think having those conversations are so important, because you might have somebody that's serving in youth ministry because they have a teenage child, and they think, well, I thought that I was, I'm a parent, so I thought I had to be serving, and having conversations with people. Sometimes you find out, well, really they prefer to work with preschoolers. And I'm like, well, you don't have to serve where your kids are. You can come serve in preschool ministry and have, it's fine. There's no expectation of what you have to do or what you have to be. And again, even in Bible study, when you have that, like, to have somebody that says, I'm not super comfortable teaching Bible to kids. Well, would you be an assistant teacher, and we'd have a teacher that leads the Bible, and you could be in charge of doing the craft, or you could be in charge of doing the games, or, really having those conversations where you find out, where would you be comfortable serving? Would you be comfortable being the second person in a room?
Right.
Or it might be a person that, they would be better for as your hall director, or maybe just as handling all of your visitation type stuff, or maybe as working in your resource room, organizing your resource, and not necessarily working directly with kids, but having those other opportunities where they can serve is huge.
Absolutely.
This is my heart's desire when I work with children's ministers, is to help them see that God has placed them where they are, to use the gifts that they have to be able to minister to children and their families. And, there's always going to be those people that are trying to discourage and that are trying to point out flaws, or trying to point out what we don't do, or what we haven't done, or how we aren't behaving the way they think that we should, or all of those kinds of things. But I think the most important thing that we can remember is that God has called us here for a reason and for a purpose.
Amen.
And we just keep our eyes on him and on what he's called us to do, and relying on him to serve through us and to work through us, and just be willing to learn and grow and accept your weaknesses and admit your mistakes, and move forward to be able to try to improve, and to try to learn, and to just minister more. And so I don't want anyone to feel alone in the way that they might feel about how they are perceived, or how hard it is to serve in children's ministry, because it can be so difficult. But there are also so many blessings and so many rewards from it as well. And so we just wanted to take some time and encourage you in that, and let you know that you are not alone, but also to let you know that we are just so very proud of the work that you are doing, and how hard you are trying to serve God in your ministry. And I hope that we were helpful with that today. Dr. Virginia, it's been fun talking to you, and I look forward to us having a conversation again soon. Everyone have a great week and take care. Bye-bye.